This is Moses and the prophets, the channel committed to reestablishing messianic prophecy as the vital center of the faith of Messiah Jesus. John 14:6 is the most exclusivist statement in the New Testament, possibly in all of religious literature. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. It gets used constantly as a closing argument, as a boundary marker, as the definitive answer to the question of other religions and other paths. And the argument it supports is straightforward. Jesus is the exclusive route to God, full stop. Now, Christianity was already more exclusive than most people are comfortable with before this verse ever enters the picture. Judaism posits one particular God, Yahweh, sovereign creator of the universe, and one particular people chosen to bear his name and his covenant. That's already a deeply narrow claim in a world full of religious options, and Christianity inherits that narrowness completely and then narrows it further. Not only is Yahweh the exclusive God, but the mediator through whom Yahweh is approached is a specific person, Messiah Jesus. The confession is not just God is one, but Jesus is Lord and Christ, the Savior of the world. And without that confession, the Father is not reached. Now, most Christians accept this gladly. The narrowing does not trouble us. We confess it without hesitation. Jesus is the only way. We have no problem with this. But here's the question that almost nobody asks. We accept the conclusion easily. We hold the confession as a portable statement, formed, transferable, receivable, without examination of its premises necessarily. Jesus is Lord arrives as a conclusion, and we take it as one. We affirm it, we defend it, we use it as a closing argument, and in doing so, we treat the exclusivity as residing entirely in the person, as a fact about who Jesus is that we assent to, without necessarily asking whether the confession itself, to be a genuine confession and not merely an ideal one, requires something more from us than assent to a conclusion. What if the exclusivity is even narrower than we thought? What if the way, the truth, and the life refers not only to the exclusive person of Christ, but to the exclusive means by which that person acts in the world to reveal the Father? What if the confession has to involve the whole man, both the intuitive and the rational, engaged not only with what was done, but with what God had to say before it was done? What if God is looking for something more than an ideal assent to a portable statement, something that evidences a real moral bearing, a genuine love and search, an actual engagement with the objective testimony that had to exist before anyone could have any real knowledge of God at all? Because there's a difference between an ideal confession and a real one. An ideal confession is a correctly formed statement held in the mind. A real confession is a fully formed engagement of the whole person with the objective reality the statement claims to name. And the objective reality that John 14:6 names, the way, the truth, and the life, is not an interior ideality we generate from sincere religious feeling. It's something that first transcended into history from outside, was recorded in specific documents, and put on record before the events it described, and is therefore available to be known, examined, and received as the prior witness it actually is. And what if Jesus is actually not only a person, but this revelation? So that you can't take one without taking the other. You can't know one without knowing the other. So look, a naive pagan faith, however sincere, can't substitute for this. Not because sincerity is worthless, but because sincerity directed at interior ideality is not the same thing as engagement with the objective reality that had to precede it. You can't genuinely confess the destination without knowing the road. You can't receive the person without receiving the word that announced him. And you can't hold the conclusion without being accountable to the premises. That is what this video is about. Not just the exclusivity of the person, but the exclusivity of the revelatory content that must be known and believed. The prophetic word, the prior testimony, the documents that were written before the event, and that define what the event means and who the person is. John 14:6 is not a closing argument. It is a thesis statement, and we are going to open it. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John 1:14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. No serious dispute, Jesus is the Word. The church confesses it. But here's the question that almost never gets asked. What kind of Word? The church treats the Word as a generality, revelation in the abstract, Scripture in the broad sense, divine communication as a category, but that is not what John 1 is saying. Jesus is not a general instance of the Word. He is a specific Word, as particular as a person, as historically bounded as a birth announced to a virgin in Isaiah 7, a ruler from Bethlehem in Micah 5, a king entering Jerusalem on a donkey in Zechariah 9. The Word that became flesh is the Word written down in specific texts about a specific figure arriving at a specific moment in history. The flesh it became is the particular person of Jesus of Nazareth. The particularity of the person and the particularity of the Word are the same particularity. What was inscribed before he arrived and the one who arrived are identical in what they affect. Access to the Father. Neither of them is general. Neither of them is a category. And neither of them are disposable or can be decentered. This is the first move the church misses. And because it misses it with the Word, it misses it everywhere Jesus speaks about himself. Every self-declaration gets read through the same flattening lens. A spiritual concept, a broad category, a general truth about divinity, a particular prophetic content that gives each statement its actual weight, gets dissolved into vague religiosity. Which brings us directly back to John 14:6. Because the way, the truth, and the life carry the same particularity as the Word. They are not concepts, they are prophetic figures. Now watch what culture does with these three phrases. It hears the way as a directional concept. Jesus is the general spiritual direction toward God. It hears the truth as an epistemological category. Jesus, the person, is trustworthy. Jesus does not lie. It hears the life as a general vitality, abundant life, a richer, more meaningful existence. All three read as spiritual concepts, universal, transferable, accessible to anyone who holds the right attitude toward Jesus in a general sense. But the way, the truth, and the life are prophetic figures. Each one names something the Hebrew witnesses had already put on record. Each one maps onto a specific dimension of what the prophetically constituted Messiah was announced to be and do. They belong to a specific testimony written in advance about a specific figure. And the three are sequential. The way is directional. It tells you how to approach. The truth is the destination. It is what you arrive at when the way has been followed. And the life is the effect. It's what happens to a person who has come through the way and reached the truth. Direction, destination, and effect. Jesus did not invent these figures on the night he spoke them to Thomas. He had been demonstrating and enacting all three throughout his entire ministry. So let us go to what he showed us. Now, the way is about approach, the structure of movement toward God, and the symbols Jesus uses that align with this figure all share the same logic. There is one defined narrow point of entry. It stands in explicit contrast to a broader and more popular alternative, and you either pass through it or you don't. John 10:9, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The door is not a concept only. It's a threshold. You pass through it or you go around it. And going around it means you are not in the room. Now notice what Jesus said immediately before this. All who came before me are thieves and robbers. He's identifying false access points, structures that present themselves as legitimate routes to God but are not. There's one threshold, this one. Matthew 7, enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter by it. But the gate is narrow and the way is difficult that leads to life, and few are those that find it. The majority take the broad way, not because they are uniquely wicked, but because the broad way feels like the right way. It doesn't require you to receive anything specific, anything costly, anything most of your community would find demanding. The narrow way does. It leads to life, the same life that is the third figure in John 14:6. He closes here with a sermon with the warning that makes the stakes explicit. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And I will declare to them, I never knew you. They were on the broad way and had no idea. They held the confession as a conclusion. They never passed through the door. The truth is where the way terminates. It is the arrival point. And what you arrive at is the prophetically constituted identity of Messiah, recognized through prior knowledge of what was inscribed before he came, received as supernatural disclosure rather than cultural inheritance. John 8:31 through 32. If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The condition is abiding in his word. The truth is what the word delivers when you remain in it with enough seriousness that something specific becomes clear. A few verses later, Jesus says this, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad. Before Abraham was, I am. He's pointing to what was written, to the promise inscribed in Genesis 22 about the seed through whom all nations would be blessed. The truth is the correspondence between what the prophetic rhetoric put down centuries earlier and the new one now standing in front of them. That correspondence received as supernatural disclosure is what sets free. John 5:46-47, if you believe Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote of me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words? Believing the written testimony and believing Jesus are not two separate acts. They're one act. The destination of the way is Jesus recognized through and as what was written before he came. Prior knowledge of what was foretold, correspondence seen between those texts and the person. That correspondence received as genuine recognition, not doctrinal assumption, not cultural inheritance, is the truth. That is where the narrow way terminates. And now the warning from Matthew 7 comes in with full force. Many called him Lord. They did works in his name, but they never arrived at this destination. They held a portable conclusion. They never engaged the premises. The life, the last of the triad, is what the way and the truth produce in a person when the access structure is genuinely operative. And Jesus did not merely speak about it, he enacted it repeatedly in a pattern that tracked exactly what the prophetic record said would happen when Messiah arrived. Isaiah 35, 5 through 6, written centuries before, the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. The lame man shall leap like a deer. Isaiah 61, 1, which Jesus reads aloud at the opening of his public ministry. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind. Now look, these are not general descriptions of compassion. They're written forecast, a specific credential inscribed before the event. When John the Baptist asked from prison whether Jesus is the one who was to come, Jesus does not give a theological argument, and he does not spring him from prison. He says, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk. Lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up." He points to the written forecast. The life is its own answer. The dead are raised, the widow's son at Nain. Jesus says, "Young man, arise," and the dead man sits up. A crowd responds immediately. A great prophet has arisen among us. God has visited his people. They recognize the prophetic credential being enacted. Lazarus, 4 days dead, already in the tomb, and before Jesus calls into the tomb, he names the figure he is about to enact. "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." Then Lazarus walks out. This is the effect. The blind seeing, the dead walking out of tombs, the captives set loose. And it does not arrive by bypassing the direction or refusing the destination. The three are a single structure. Each one requires the others. So now we return to where we began. John 14:6 is the most exclusivist statement in the New Testament. We said that at the onset, and it remains true. But we are now in a position to say precisely what the exclusivity is and precisely what it demands. The person is exclusive. That has not changed. Jesus is the only mediator. The confession Jesus is Lord is not negotiable and has no substitute. Christianity is narrower than Judaism, narrower than any religion that stops at the sovereignty of God without the required mediator, and narrower than any spirituality that gestures toward transcendence without locating it in a specific historical figure whose coming was announced in specific documents before he arrived. But the exclusivity does not stop at the person. It runs all the way through the means by which the person is known. The way is exclusive, not just directionally, but structurally. There is one door. The broad way, however religious, however sincere, does not pass through it. And the people Jesus warned about in Matthew 7, the ones who called him Lord and did works in his name and were told, I never knew you, were not pagans. They were people who held the conclusion without the premises, who carried a portable confession without passing through the door it names. The truth is exclusive, not just as a property of Jesus' character, but as a specific content that must be known and be received. The prophetic witness, the prior documents, what was put on record before the event so that the event could be recognized when it came. That recognition, prior textual knowledge, correspondence seen, received a supernatural disclosure, is the destination. And it can't be substituted by sincerity, by religious feeling, by an interior ideality that we mistake for transcendence because it moves us deeply. What moves us deeply is not the same as what first moved into history from outside in transcendence to make any real knowledge of God possible. This is the harder claim. Not just that Jesus is the only way, but that the way, the truth, and the life names a fully formed engagement of the whole person, both intuitive and rational, with the objective reality the confession claims. God is not looking only for a correctly formed ideal statement held in the mind. He's looking for a real engagement with the real word, the prior testimony, the inscribed forecast, the documents that predated the event and defined it before it arrived. Received as what it actually is, the exclusive revelatory content through which the exclusive person is genuinely known. A naive faith, however warm, however sincere, however correctly labeled, that holds the conclusion without the premises, is not a smaller version of this. It is a different thing entirely. The broad way and the narrow way do not differ in degree, they differ in kind. The narrow way is narrow because the word is particular, because the prophetic testimony is specific, because the recognition event that constitutes real reception of the truth cannot be approximated by cultural inheritance or doctrinal assumption. It has to happen. The whole man has to come through the door. Not just the faculty that handles portable statements, but the moral bearing, the love, the search, the actual engagement with what God said before he did what he did. That is the exclusivity of John 14:6. Not just the person, the whole structure. If you've been in church for years, I want to speak to you directly. You may have received Jesus as a person without ever receiving the prophetic witness as a document or knowing anything about messianic prophecy. You may have held the confession Jesus is Lord as a conclusion without ever examining the premises that make it true and particular rather than merely ideal and portable. You may have been told that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life without anyone ever showing you that these are prophetic figures, specific, historically grounded, demanding a real engagement of the whole person, and not spiritual concepts that sincere religious feeling can approximate. And that part is not your fault, but it is worth knowing. Because the recognition event, the moment when you see the correspondence between what was written before he arrived and the one who arrived, is not the same as being told this correspondence exists. It's something that happens when you look at the text with the actual question open. Was this known in advance? And if it was, what does that mean about the one it describes and about what I am actually being asked to receive? That question is the narrow gate. On the other side is not an argument you can win in conversation. It is the life, the thing the healings were showing, the thing Lazarus walking out of the tomb was announcing, the final effect of the whole access structure delivered to everyone who actually came through the door. Jesus did not offer a general way and call it narrow. He did not offer a vague truth and call it the destination. He did not promise a manageable life and call it resurrection. He said, I am the way, the door, the narrow path, the one defines structure of approach through which alone the Father is reached. He said, I am the truth, the living correspondence of everything the prophets put on record before he came, the particular destination that the broad way never reaches. He said, I am the life, the blind seeing, the dead walking out of tombs, the captives set loose, the final effect that the whole access structure exists to deliver. And he said, no one comes to the Father except through this. Not through a conclusion held without premises, not through a confession carried without engagement. Through this, the Word, the prophetic word, particular and prior, received by the whole person as the objective reality it is. That is the exclusivity of John 14:6, and it has been sitting in your Bible the whole time.